I didn't know when a good time to bring up about my dad being a murderer was. So
Imagine finding out at 6 that your dad is not away picking fruit on a farm, but instead serving time in prison for murder, and then discovering at 15 it was actually a double homicide. Today's guest found herself in such a situation and lived the reality of how crime also impacts the family of the guilty. Today, she's a social worker, a mum, and author of 2 books about her life, The House of Lies and Unravelling Us. Episode 111, Renee McBryde. The One Moment Please podcast.
Yeah.
hi, how are you?
I'm good. You were sitting in sunny Alice Springs, which I had just recently gone through last year. I think it was last year now.
Yes.
It was a beautiful part of the world. So I'm a little envious that you get to live in such a beautiful place, but not so envious because it's really bloody hot.
It's really bloody hot all the time. Yeah. Like, winter is lovely. And this is the time where it's really starting to look forward to a cool down. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. We got I've just moved to Hobart, so literally we get one day of 30 degrees and then it's 14 for the next week. So
Yeah. Opposite ends
how I go
of
with
the
that.
spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much, yeah. I was fascinated by your story. So thank you for coming onto the podcast, because it's not a typical situation where somebody writes a book, or 2 books now, about their father who is a double murderer, really. I don't know how else to put it. So you've written the books House of Lies and Unravelling Us. But you were quite young when you found out. You were 6 when you found out that your father was in prison. Talk me through what life was like up to 6 and then sort of finding out.
I guess you always think your childhood is normal. Pretty much, I lived with my mum. I did think I was with my mum, and then I would go to my grandparents pretty much every weekend, and they very much doted on me. And I just really thought the only difference was my mum was quite young and much younger than all the other mums. And my dad worked away at Cotty's Cordial. That's what I believed up until I was 6.
How did you find out about your dad not working for Cotty's Cordial?
So it was quite a surprise. When I was at my grandparents' each weekend, on Saturday nights, I used to have a phone call with my dad because he was away working at the Cotty's Cordial farm. But he would always ring on a Saturday night after or around when I was watching Young Talent Time, because I'm an 80s baby. And so one night it was just a normal phone call that was scheduled for Saturday night. And my dad just said to me on the phone, actually, I don't really work for Cotty's Cordial. And I was just like, what? And he was like, I want to tell you this because I want you to be able to come and see me. But I'm actually in jail. And I was just like, whoa. And I started crying. And then I was like, what are you in jail for? And he was like, murder. And I was just completely in tears and losing it. And my grandparents just took the phone off me and were like, what are you saying to her? And that's really what I remember, my nan taking the phone away, and I was just crying, and then Young Talent Time was starting to play in the background, and I was like, well, this is not what I thought was going to happen tonight.
Well, but what's the catalyst for him telling you? Because how long had he been in prison for at this stage?
My whole life. So since my mum was pregnant with me, he was arrested, when she was pregnant with me. And so the catalyst, I guess, really was that he wanted me to come and visit him. And unless I knew that he was in prison, I couldn't really do that. I guess as a 6-year-old, I would probably notice that it wasn't a fruit farm, perhaps, and that it was like a maximum security jail that, that I was supposed to go and visit. So I guess that was really the reason. Yeah.
So at what point, so you have a conversation with your father saying, I'm in prison and I'm a murderer, really. What then happens when you get off the phone? How do you digest that? And what are your grandparents? If your grandparents weren't expecting that to happen, what are they telling you at that point?
Well, I think the whole night just blew up. So immediately they called my mum to come. And so I remember like her arriving fully dressed up to go night clubbing with her friends because I was with my grandparents. And then they all kind of really just sat around the table trying to explain to me what this meant. And really just sort of, I think they tried to give me a version that was, palatable as much as possible. Like your dad was kind of, he didn't really have a choice. He's not a bad person. And, this is a secret that we have to keep. And, you can't tell anybody. And this is just a family secret and we can never talk about it.
So that's a big burden to put on a kid at 6. This is a huge family secret. Why were they saying that he didn't have a choice? Because it wasn't a self-defense situation. Were they his parents or your mum's parents?
My mum's parents. So yeah, right. It's quite unusual because I think they really. So my nan and my grandparents loved Chuck Norris action movies, and they tried to make out to me that these men that died were like baddies, and that my dad was sort of like a Chuck Norris-y type of hero. I think that they felt like it was very complex, and that was a way that I could kind of maybe sit with it if I felt like, oh, that's a lot, but maybe it was more like this action movie type thing. That would be less difficult to process at the time. I think they were just like thinking on their feet, really had no game plan because they just didn't expect me to find out at that time. And so they just thought something up on the spot. And I didn't really know the details of the crimes until much, much later. And so that was kind of the story that I guess I was told then, and then I would get little bits and pieces, more of the story over time, usually when my mum was like drunk and would want to talk about it, because I ultimately then became like a confidant to her. Once I was let in on the secret, then I guess the grown-ups in my life could then talk about it with me at different times. Never when I was asking questions, usually when they felt like talking about it. And so I guess my curiosity over time, like obviously as a 6-year-old, I would believe the kind of Chuck Norris type action movie hero thing because it was just so far-fetched to believe that my parent was a terrible person who could do something so terrible. But then I guess as I got older and I started to question, well, what did that look like and who were these people and what was the situation? And I kind of started to do my own investigating to find out more information. Then my thoughts about that truth kept evolving.
What age were you when you realised the gravity of the crime?
I think, again, like I always knew that killing someone was bad. I think there were a few stages where I felt like, oh, hang on, this is much worse than I thought. Like one of those key times was going to visit my father at Long Bay maximum security jail, I felt like, oh, like good people or action heroes pretty much don't come to maximum security jails like this. This is not making sense to me. But then over time, when I started to investigate it further myself, I guess a key point was when I was around 15, I found out that you could go and look up all old newspaper articles at the state library. And I took myself off there instead of going to school one day and did my own kind of investigation. And I could read all of the newspaper headlines and kind of almost follow the case as they were investigating it through the headlines, from when the men were killed to when my father went to court and was arrested, all of those things. So I could kind of make up my own mind and read those articles. And I guess at that point, I felt like I'd have to rely on other people to feed me little bits of the story. I could read the facts. And so I guess then I was like, well, okay, this is like the real version, and this is a lot. And yeah, I need to keep it a secret.
What made you get to the point where you were like, I am going to WAG school and go to the library and research this? Were you asking questions and not satisfied with the answers? Like, how did you get to the point of, I realize that people aren't telling me the truth, I have to go research this myself?
Yeah. I think like my mum was always very broken about it, and always seemed just so upset. And whenever she would drink wine, then she would want to talk to me about it, but I couldn't really, became her support person. And so she would
devastating as a child.
Oh, it was, now I look back and I think that was a lot. But yeah, I think whenever I wanted to ask more questions, or I wasn't able to get the answers, and I could see she was very broken about it. So whenever she was sober, I could never ask questions. My grandmother died when I was 12, and so that kind of really cut off any other line of questioning, because she kind of had the information, and maybe she would talk about it in a different way to my mum. But ultimately, I kind of tracked my dad down after my grandmother died. I navigated the prison system and tried to find him so I could ask him questions myself, because I'm just like a little nerd child who just put her little 20-cent pieces into the public telephone box and just called up Long Bay Jail. And then eventually they went and got him and put him on the phone, and we started talking. And over time, that kind of led to me going and having a visit with him for a weekend.
How old were you?
15. I popped myself on the train all the way out to Maitland, which is a low security prison at the time. And he was on weekend release at that time. And so I went.
So had you seen him before at all?
I'd seen him as a child with my nan and my grandfather, a few different visits. But my mum, I guess, really struggled with my grandparents facilitating that. She didn't really understand why it wasn't their son. And that's kind of just a weird little thing that my nan really drove for some reason.
That's why I asked if it was his parents or your mum's parents. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a weird thing that she did. Like, apparently my nan really wanted to have a son, and she took a bit of a shine to him, like, for some reason, and she kept facilitating that against my mother's wishes for a long period of time. But obviously when she passed away when I was 12, that just ended that communication. And so yeah, when I was about 15, I really did have a lot of questions. My mum, I could see, was still carrying all of that trauma, but didn't want to ever tell me what the situation was, what the truth was. So I just decided to get it from him.
So most people that find out somebody has done something violent or, I don't know, murderous, they wouldn't necessarily seek that person out. What made you then turn around and say, I want to find my dad, when you've read the circumstances in regards to his conviction and the case? Can you sort of give us a very brief overview in regards to what was the crime?
So I actually hadn't been and done my investigations yet when I went to visit him. So I went to visit him, and I had this intensely uncomfortable weekend. When I look back now, I think, what was my mother thinking, letting me go on a train by myself, hours away, to spend a weekend release?
So she knew.
She knew, yeah.
Okay.
And so I guess I was going. He had a new family by then, and so did my mum. So I guess I was feeling really displaced. And my mum was married and had a child, and I just felt like I didn't have a place there. And then I think my mother said a really throwaway comment like, your father's done nothing from you, why don't you go? I'd been selected to go on an exchange program to France, and she said, I'm not sending you, I don't have any money. Why don't you call up your father and see if he'll support you? He's done nothing your whole life. And so that was kind of like probably one of the main reasons as well. I was like, I want to get out of here. I want to go and live away from both of them in France for a year. That didn't happen because it turns out being in jail for your whole life, you also don't have money either. But yeah, so I kind of went on this awkward weekend and met him and his new partner, and they met in jail. And so they took me on this.
She a prison officer?
No, she's a bank robber. So yeah.
Aren't they segregated in jail?
Well, if you're a couple, you can have, particularly in low security, you can have these conjugal visits. So I actually have 2 stepbrothers who were conceived in conjugal tent visit jail circumstances.
Situation.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, so that's cool, right? And I went for the weekend. It was super uncomfortable, and I felt like, oh, this is also not my place. I don't have a place here. And I tried to ask him a lot of questions about how do you come to know that your girlfriend is pregnant and you're going to have a baby, and then you go and kill 2 people? Like, what were you thinking? And gosh, I look back now and think, geez, I had some balls going out on that train and going and asking this stranger man
double murderer, bank robber, let's go stay with him for the weekend.
Right? Like, what was he thinking? But anyway,
15-year-old.
Yeah, I just thought I'd go get the answers myself, and I just came away like just feeling pretty like I'm never going to know the answers. And so
what was his response?
Just like, you can't understand. Again, it was like that, we make mistakes and I've done my time, and I understood that, but I also just wanted to know, like my mum was pregnant, and you knew that you were going to have this child, but then you went and committed this crime and left her and me, and you've not bothered really with me since, and she's broken, and I want to know what happened. And so it was pretty uncomfortable. And then I remember getting on the train to come back. It was like a few hours away, and just being like, whoa, okay, I'm not doing that again. And so, yeah, it kind of came up like maybe a little bit later that I had a legal studies assignment at school, and the teacher said, yeah, you can go and look up all these old crimes. Like, that was one of the assignments. And I thought, holy crap, you can go and look up all the old newspaper articles. And so, yeah, I decided just to go one day and look up all my dad's crimes. So, yeah, that was how that kind of eventuated, because I just sort of felt like, well, I, I don't, I have his version, limited version. I had my mum's, but yeah, I didn't know that I could go and have this sort of information and look up all the old newspapers. So yeah, I just took myself off and spent the day at the state library and got out all the old newspapers and looking under the microscope and reading them, and sort of learnt about it that way.
And what did you find out?
Well, I just learned that, I think the biggest thing that I learned was I'd always sort of been told that like it was this one night, like an armed robbery that kind of went wrong because the people were home, and then they felt like they had to, I guess, kill them so that they wouldn't get caught for breaking and entering. But when I was there, I was like, oh, there was this one murder, and then actually this other murder was quite some time after, like maybe a few weeks after or a month later. So I had to then be like, oh, this happened. It's not really a crime of passion. Like maybe you could understand how that might happen if you kind of warp your imagination around it. But then it's happened again a few weeks later in the same sort of scenario. And so that was brand new information to me, that it was on two separate nights, these two different murders, and both were kind of breaking and entering situations. But then it kind of evolved that maybe my dad had been like a sex worker for these people and was breaking in, and then decided to, they were much older men, and then had just killed them with another accomplice. So the same accomplice on both times. And yeah, and so I kind of tracked that. Also, they had like kind of offered to help the police in their investigations, and then were finally arrested. So I learned about the police breaking in to an apartment where my mum was there too, sleeping, and my dad being like arrested and hauled off. And yeah, and then I read about all of the court case, and then to when his like verdict was handed down. And so yeah, that was a pretty wild day to be able to read about all of these events that happened while I was like tucked in my mum's tummy, and what she was kind of going through, how confronting that would have been, but also just finally understanding what happened, like the truth.
How did that, I don't know how, if how did that sit with you is the right thing, but how did you sort of digest that very full on information?
Yeah, I think I almost feel like I was at the library, and, you know, it's a really quiet place. And so I just feel like I just closed the book on that. Like, whoa, there was this line that the judge had said to my father, like, you're a cold-blooded murderer. And I just feel like at that time, I remember just being like, yep, that's it. Okay, well, Mum's right. Like, I can never tell anybody about this because I'll always be judged like that's who my dad is. And, you know, at that time, like when you're a kid and a teenager, like so much of your identity is about who your parents are. So it was just like this thing that I felt like, well, I could just never say the truth to anybody because it would always just be so full on. Like even if I met a partner or I, you know, had a really good friend, I just could never tell the truth because they would be like, whoa, what kind of family do you come from? It was already pretty odd that I had this super young mum. And that then she had this kind of second family at the normal time where you would kind of start having kids. So I already felt that extreme displacement and oddity to other families and other girls my age. So I felt like, okay, we've got to squash this, and you've just got to be like as normal and as bright and overachieving as possible, and then that will just make all that go away, disappear.
I think as teenage girls with the hormones and everything, you can feel a lot of shame and embarrassment for things that as an adult you probably would have a different feeling about. I think it's quite normal. There's a lot of scientific evidence about it. Did you feel a sense of shame that you're in that situation, both with a young mum and then your dad was in prison? Is that one of the other things that you felt that burden was on you to keep secret?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I felt immense shame because I just was so different to all my peers. Yeah.
Where did your friends think that your dad was? On a Cotties farm?
Yeah, that was the story that I continued with in primary school for quite a while. But then I just started experimenting, and I often would say different stories like he's dead, or they've separated, or I don't know who my father is. I was an accident. Like lots of teenage girls can be pretty mean as well. So already when just looking at my mom, everybody used to say I was an accident. Like she didn't plan to have you, because she was 15 when she fell pregnant with me. So
wow. How old was your dad?
So he was about 18. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
19. So 19 when he was arrested and when I was born.
Did you get to the stage where if you were starting to experiment with all these different stories that you're getting labelled a liar?
Not really. I guess I just tried to avoid talking about it most of the time. And then once I was sort of, I could also, my mum had a partner from when I was 12, and sometimes people would just assume that he was my biological dad as well. And I would just also let that go on as if that's what they wanted to believe.
Did you get on well with him?
It was a little bit difficult as a teenager, but we do get along now. Yeah.
Very diplomatically said, Renee.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're sitting in the library, you find out the scenario, the reality of the crimes. What do you then do with that information?
I think at the time I just really pushed it down and was like, yeah, you've got to keep this a secret. And then I guess my goal was really just to become this giant overachiever and try and get the hell out of my current life. So the plan was to just basically get into law, to go to uni, move away from, home as soon as possible, basically. And so that was what my focus was.
So when did you decide to write the book?
I decided to write the book.
There's a lot of water under the bridge now. You've got 4 kids. You're a little bit further removed from that 15-year-old. So
yeah,
I'm trying to figure out what happened between 15 and writing the book.
Yeah, I think what ultimately sparked me wanting to write the book was I could just see my mum was still, over time, no matter what great things happened, like she had, she got married and she had 2 little girls, like my beautiful sisters, and her life just became super normal, but on the outside, but it was still constantly eating her up inside. It was still lots of drinking, and every single time there would be this like extreme trauma and trying to process still things that had happened with my dad, and still 20 years on being like, I can never tell anyone about this. Like friends that she'd been friends with for a very long time, and the expectation that I would still never tell anyone about this. And I guess as I got older and I started to test that trust sometimes, and experiment with like telling the truth, that I found that, oh, actually people won't just completely disregard me or throw me away as a friend or as a partner. It started to really become important to me to be able to say the truth. And so I guess after a little while, I'm also a social worker, and I guess I also feel like there's this great burden that comes with secrecy and the shame that just keeps breeding. And I think I just saw that in my mother, and also my grandmother, when she passed away, had kept a lot of secrets. And I sort of felt like I looked at my mum one day and I just felt like, holy crap, like she's going to die like my grandmother, feeling so full of shame and that no one is ever going to love her for who she really is. And then I'm going to end up being like that too if I keep buying into this. And so I just started to tell people. And then eventually, over time, I felt like I wanted to write a book, because I'd always, thought about writing and being a writer. And then, I just started to write down some of those stories and process those emotions in a different way.
What was the response from your mum? Because I'm assuming that her new husband knew about the ex situation.
Okay.
What was, or maybe he didn't with that.
Not for a long
smile.
time. No, he did it for a very long time. And probably that was one of the only people she ended up telling. So yes, there was a lot of secrecy for a long time.
So how did she respond when you said, I'm writing the book?
There was a lot of conversations about it. Initially, she was very much against me writing the book, because she believed that my father would come and kill me for writing the book, and she would openly say that. I think it was just a process. At the time, I was honest with her, but also the chances of publishing a book are just so slim. So it was like, you don't really have to worry about this now. I'm just writing. I'm also not this super famous writer that's just going to get suddenly a book deal, although that's what happened. It was something that was like really gradual. And I guess the whole time I was still trying to say, like if I told a friend about my dad, she would just lose it. Like, she didn't even want my sisters to know. They would come to me as teenagers. And basically my mum said, if your sisters ever find out, I will kill myself, or I will just run away to India and none of you will ever see me again. And so again, that just sat so uncomfortably with me.
It's a burden.
It's another burden.
Such a burden to put on a kid, yeah.
Yeah. She was like, you can just tell them when I die. I was like, I don't want that responsibility. In the end, my stepdad kind of told them, and then they came to me for the story. And when they knew the truth, Mum didn't speak to any of us for months on end. But then ultimately she realized, like, they just got her in a different way, and they were relieved, because they were like, oh, this makes sense. This is why she drinks lots of wine and is crying in the corner of her bedroom for days on end. Like, we get it. Oh, like, big things have happened to Mum. She's not just crazy. And they really kind of showed her this love that she wasn't expecting once she started talking to us all again. And there was a great relief in them knowing. And I just was trying to get her on board with, this is what actually can be like with all of your friends that you've, had in your life for all of these years. They're not going to judge you. They're going to love you, and they're going to understand you more. but she couldn't reconcile it, and she really did spread this fear that we were all going to die if I wrote this book. And I was just determined to show her that, one, I'm not buying into this drama. Two, it's my story. And three, like, you are also going to experience this level of understanding that you won't ever have got before. But she, dug her heels in and just hated it the whole time.
Why was she concerned that he was going to come after you now from writing the book compared to sending you off as a 15-year-old to see him for the weekend and then telling people in your circle anyway? What was the difference? Is it just because it was on a bigger scale, more public scale?
Well, I guess the social worker in me says that it was her, she's stuck in that trauma phase of being that 15-year-old girl, and she really couldn't get past that that fear that she had at that time, that he would blow up her life again. So even though we talked at length about, actually, in many ways, he had the biggest opportunity to heal because he was in a jail with, no access to alcohol as something to numb the pain with, lots of, social services, had to go through a whole system of prison to navigate. Whereas my mum immediately became a single teenage mother who was homeless at the time and began to numb all of that pain with alcohol. So she, in some ways, had more trauma and an inability to process it because she had me to look after and had to work and she wasn't sort of sitting in a cell thinking about her actions or what had happened to her.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's sort of the, if you could document and write a textbook in terms of the trauma that crime, how that travels to outside of the person that's just committed the crime. It is sort of a textbook situation, isn't it? And then you can understand why your dad then, if he's done all, I don't know your dad, I've never spoken to your dad, but if he had done that work in terms of why did I do that and access to all the therapy or whatever, you can then kind of also understand why he was like, I don't want to go back into that place.
Yeah.
As well, I said to talk to you. Not that I'm justifying any actions.
No, but yeah, exactly. He's moved forward and had many, many, many years to process what happened. And I mean, of course, I don't justify that to his actions, but also a teenager. And I guess there's a lot of time to think and process in prison.
Did you ever get a straight answer as to why?
No, never.
Okay.
No. And I understand the heat of the moment and all of those crimes of passion and things like this, but ultimately I did find that hard to sit with that story when it had happened twice. So
weeks apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and going from Cotty's to superhero Avenger story to finding out that it wasn't a crime of it was crime of passion, to then it was actually sounds premeditated because it was murder, not manslaughter. So very difficult arc of exploration and learning you went on. To take you back to the situation and the time when you are now writing the book and you've got published, so you didn't do a JK and end up writing and trying to go to 100 million publishers or whoever many was, 26 or something she tried.
Yeah.
So you did pick up a publishing deal, so congratulations on that.
Thanks.
How then did she, if you'd been saying to her, I'm just writing the book, don't worry about it, it's probably not going to get published, how did she then react to, oh, by the way, Mum, this is now being published?
So by the time it was published, she had not been speaking to me already for a year. So because she often would do that, there would just be, I think, like I mentioned just before, like if she was angry, she would stop talking to me and my sisters for long periods of time. And that was one time. So I actually didn't hear from her for a long time. I sent her the book in an email before it was published, just so she could have the heads up. But I knew that she didn't read it and didn't say anything about it. So
how did you know she didn't read it? No read receipt received?
My sisters told me. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So
wow.
yeah,
So
it was really just published and out in the world, and I hadn't heard from her, and until like I already knew she didn't want that to happen.
How did your sisters deal with it?
I guess throughout the time, I mean, they were great. They also read it before it came out, and they thought it was. I guess I also had them read it to vet it for what do you think Mum's going to think, like. And I guess like really the book doesn't really talk about my mother. That book doesn't talk about my mother a lot. It really is about processing my dad's story. And then actually the second half is not so much about that at all either. So yeah, I think they were really amazing. They came to the book launches, they celebrated with me, and I guess they also had the same sort of struggles with Mum, and wanting her to feel like a normal person and being able to move forward and be able to process it, because it just consumed her still, even all those years later.
Was your grandfather still alive?
No, he wasn't. But I mean, he pretty much just thought I was pure sunshine. So he would have just been like, do whatever you like. And he was very much, we were so close. And I guess he also really tried to work with Mum to move forward and process things, but she could be very difficult. She was at the extreme. When she was good, she was amazing and funny and the life of the party, but when she was in a dark space, she was pretty hard to be around.
What was your relationship with your dad up until this point?
Up until writing the book, I had no relationship. So I literally didn't see him again after I was a teenager.
So when you went and saw him for that week, the weekend when you were 15, was that the last time you saw him and spoke to him?
The last time I saw him was actually on TV the day he was officially released. And it was the morning, I was getting ready for school, and I remember my mum was pretty worried about the time that he was going to be officially released, because I was about to be 16, about to be 16. And so she was hugely concerned that they were going to mention our names on TV or on the radio whenever they reported about his release, because it had been so long. And 16
being the legal cutoff that you could do that?
Yeah, that they could mention my name, that I was 16. Okay. Yeah. So I think like your name as a child has to be left out of it, but when you're 16, it can be mentioned. And so it was really bizarre. Like we actually didn't know what day he was going to be released, but it was like the morning, Today Show or something of the like. And I was just standing there in my fully dressed for school, just slopping a bowl of cereal. And then it came on, convicted double murderer going to be released today, and showed some footage of him, and then delved back into the history of the crimes. And then the news story finished, and I just remember just putting my cereal in the sink. Mum and I didn't say anything, and I just went to school, and that was it. And we didn't really talk about it after that.
How did you process that? Because you're then carrying that. I then can't talk about it because I don't want to trigger mum. I know mum's dealing with it. She's put pressure of being a confidant on you. Don't tell anyone. No one's going to like you if you tell anybody. How do then you process the fact that this person's coming out of prison that has had such an impact in terms of the dynamic in your family without even him being a physical presence?
I think by that stage, I'd really just felt like I was really an afterthought to him. Like I began to feel like, oh, he actually just doesn't care about me, which was so silly that I still wanted him to really like love me and things like that. But I had realized in that visit that he was just a stranger, and that I was never really going to get what I needed from him, and that maybe I didn't actually want that from him. I wanted a dad, but I wanted a dad like all the other kids had a dad that was normal and that was like thought I was the apple of their eye and all of those things. And it was really the role of a dad that I was missing rather than him as an actual. I didn't want him as a person to be that for me. I just wanted two normal parents. And like by the stage I was 16, I was really seeing the end of my time at home in my sights and just being like, I'm on my own, basically. And so get on with it. That was basically how I was processing it. And on some level, I guess I was like, wow, he's just going to go on and live this whole normal life now. And I'm still dealing with my mom having like complete and utter breakdowns about it all the time.
What do you think is the difference between your mindset? Your mum went into a very dark place and you went into, I'm just going to get onto it. Some would, if you want to crudely sort of say, your mum ended up in a victim mentality and you did not. And I know there's a lot more into that than that statement suggests. What do you think it was different in regards to your mindset and why you had that difference in terms of, because you could have very much gone the whole drug route and, my dad's in prison and I've got all this stuff to deal with and I've got abandonment issues and I'm assuming, I've got no idea if you do.
All the things, yeah.
And my mum's a challenge and I've got this burden of shame and yada, 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 the whole world's on my shoulders. What then made you say, or it wasn't even a conscious thing, I'm not going to be a victim to this situation, I'm going to get out?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. They sound so lame when I say them, but like I was a really avid reader and I always just imagined I was like one of these characters in the books I was reading. I was quite naturally good at school. And so I found that I worked hard and I got a lot of affirmations from teachers when I did a good job. So I felt like I was constantly dancing for pennies of affirmation from my teachers. And so I sort of feel like that was a way that I got validation, was when a lot of teachers would be like, oh, this is really good, or your writing's really good, or, and I really craved that. And so anytime somebody at school or in anything really gave me that type of validation, I was kind of drawn to it. So probably a bit of that as well. And then I guess just early on, my grandparents were really loving and affectionate. They had no money, no nothing, but they gave me just time, like so much of their time and patience, and really made me feel loved. And so I guess that created a lot of stability. And I guess they also let me know, like, now looking back, probably it wasn't so great, but they were also like, your mum's a bit crazy. Like, don't be like this. And if she gets like that, you just call us. Or if you we love you and this is okay. Like there were times when, you know, my mum would go out drinking with friends and she would be like, I'm going to leave you with a neighbor. And I would be like, no, I want to go to my nan and grandpa's. And she would pop me in a taxi at like 11 o'clock at night from, you know, the north side all the way over to Redfern where my grandparents were with this strange taxi driver. But like, I guess I was able to assert like, no, I want to go there and be safe with them. So they created a lot of safety and stability, even amongst all that chaos as well.
Was there any ever thought that you would go and live with them full time?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. I think that was what I loved my mum. I really loved her and we were very close like sisters, but we were very much like, not like mother and child. And whenever it was like, I often wished that we were just sisters so that we could just be more normal. Because we often were like sisters. And then it was actually quite hard when she would try to parent me because I was often parenting her as well. So we had a very complex codependent relationship. But I guess when my grandmother died, that's probably when things became a little less complex because I was always wanting to be at my grandparents', always. I hated the boyfriends, I hated partners, I wanted always just to be at my grandparents'. But I did also my mum was really fun, and it sounds really awful like when she was drinking and playing loud music, but I really loved those times where she would pull me into her lap and tell me all of her secrets, even though ultimately that was probably messing me up a little bit. But it felt great to have her love. Like when she put a spotlight on you, everybody loved that because she had that kind of personality. So when you were her person, it felt great.
So that creates I'm not going to psychoanalyze it. I'm not a psychoanalyst.
My whole social work degree was me as my own client, basically social working myself. So I've psychoanalyzed every little part of me in my childhood.
Yes, but the difference is you actually had a qualification to do it. I just come from with opinion.
No, armchair social work and psychology is a real thing these days, so it's fine.
Oh, this is true. You actually, before we go into your current role, because you're in social work now, I do want to sort of finish off in regards to that dynamic. So did you ever recover a relationship with your mum or your dad after publishing the book?
My dad did reach out to me after the book, and I was quite surprised. I felt like, whoa, what is this? Like it just came up on my author page and I was just like, what is this going to say? Like, this is your dad, and what was the rest? You know, you could kind of just see a little bit of the message, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I had my mom's voice like, he's going to want to kill you. And then when I opened the message, it actually was just like, this is your dad, and I read your book, and, you know, I'm really proud that you went on to have like a nice, normal life. And I'm proud of you. And I was like, I feel like I was quite amazed by that message. And I was also really grateful because I knew that he didn't actually have to try and find me or reach out or read it or anything. But it did, I think I didn't want it to mean anything, but it actually did mean something. And I did feel like a sense of relief, like, oh, like it's okay with him that I wrote this book. And so it's okay. Yeah, it kind of made me feel a sense of calm, I guess, and also a realization that I didn't need anyone's approval to tell my own story.
How did your childhood dynamic and the relationship with your mum and your dad influence you as a parent and choosing a partner?
Well, I think there was a time where I could have really gone off the rails, but there was
I think there's lots of times you could have gone off
lots
the
of
rails,
times.
Renee.
Yeah. Like, but I think, well, I guess it's a bit of luck who you meet too, but also my husband, who we have been together since now 20, when we were 20, so it's like 20 years, maybe just a bit more because I'm older than that now. Yeah, 21 years. But it's, yeah, that stability. I guess we had this really solid friendship, and I guess I also had to kind of test out that trust. And, you know, because initially, I guess as a teenager, I guess I've always been a bit of a serial monogamist, because my younger sister and I say that too, because I guess we're seeking that normality. So we're like, no, we're normal, we're chill, like we've got this like whole relationship thing going. So we say we're the serial monogamous. But and yeah, so when I met John, I guess I decided to like be open, and really felt like I'm going to confess all of these things, and then you make a decision about whether that's too much or not. And he was like, no, I really still want to be with you, and this is what I want. And I was like, whoa, what? This is not what my mom said was going to happen. And so I guess, yeah, that felt really good to just be like not lying, because I guess there was a stage as a teenager where I felt like, I'm going to be married and still keeping this secret from someone. Holy crap, this is going to be a lot. So I guess that was a relief that didn't have to be the case. And yeah, I guess it kind of created this path to be open about it. And then when I was becoming a mum for the first time again, I was like really thoughtful about what is this going to look like, because I don't want to repeat any cycles here. And so how am I going to talk about it? And I guess part of that story and how to share it became quite different once I published the book, because my kids were still pretty young. In fact, not all of them were even born yet. And then, yeah, so I guess over time I've been really open about it, and age appropriately so. And then, yeah, it's just become natural. If they ask me questions, then I'll answer them to the best of my ability. They know that there's 2 books. They ask if they can read them, and I'm like, no, not yet, but you can ask me questions. And just being super honest and open as I can, and how that's kind of impacted on me. And I guess, yeah, they're really cool human beings. So they also sometimes out of nowhere just be like, oh, we wish you had a bit of a different childhood, mum, or, you know, things like that. It's gone better than I would have expected if I thought about it, as I was scared, I guess, what they would think of me as well, because they're the most important people to me. And so, yeah, I guess it's been a relief how it's naturally evolved and their questioning has evolved. Yeah.
I'm sorry, my cat's come to, he's hungry, he's come to hang out. So if everyone can hear some audio distortion, it's probably him purring in the background, but you're welcome, because cats' purrs are healing to the soul, and that's clinically proven. It's interesting that you sort of said how awesome your kids are, and you communicating everything to them. As I cuddle my own furry child, this is the limit of my parenting abilities. How important was it for you, and how did you create a family dynamic and environment when you didn't have a really healthy one modeled for you? How, again, that mindset of not going into that victim mode, how did you navigate that?
Well, it's been a long process. So I often like to say that I was constantly looking at other people, other mothers, other women who I admired, mother figures, and just like collecting all the good bits of them and trying to like patch them together. So I would be like, this is the blueprint here. And I don't think until I was writing my second book, I actually didn't have the words to say that I was doing that. But when I looked back, I was always like, yes, I like the way that mum does that. I like the way my friend's mum, spoke about this or does this or made me feel when I was on a play date. And so I think that, I guess subconsciously I've just been collecting little tidbits of women who I've admired and loved over my whole life. And at the same time, probably collecting things of what I did not want to be like and what I found hard. And so, I kind of felt like I was really creating this blueprint. And then once I became a mother, I realized like, the children don't respond to manuals, but like I had kind of created one for what I wanted to be like. And I then couldn't control the rest. So sometimes that didn't pan out, but I could see that that's where and sometimes still I'm like, oh my God, I need someone to come and mother me. Please come and help me. I have no idea what I'm doing. But like I'm more comfortable in that space now. But it was something that was certainly weighing on my mind in those early years of motherhood where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Quickly think back to the blueprint that I've created. And sometimes it can be lonely when you're trying to do things differently. I found that to be true as well.
Why did you make the decision to go into social work?
Oh, because I was in training from it since I was 6, I guess. I have no idea. But I feel like that's why. This whole time of like all those hours talking with my mom and trying to talk through her problems. And I guess naturally that's what I've become good at. And so I don't know. I feel like that just is what steered me there eventually. I feel like maybe I was just dragged there, and then it was like, oh yeah, look, I've had a lot of experience doing this, so we'll just keep on keeping on. Originally, I'd want to be a lawyer, but I realized actually like that wasn't people-y enough for me, and social work is kind of a natural fit.
You had a long apprenticeship as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's life like for you at the moment?
Just mumming, working, trying to write where I can. It's pretty cruisy. Like I think, I always remember my publisher from my first book. I was always kind of like, have I kind of got enough of a bang of an ending? Like I'm not like this big CEO of Google, or I kind of have to be like, murderer's daughter makes good by saving the world. And she's like, said to me something that kind of always sticks with me. And she was like, no, like actually the full circle thing is that you're not this, it's just that you're living a normal life. And I was like, oh yeah, because that's actually wasn't what was probably expected of me. If you looked at the situation when I was born, that I would be so far the other way. And so, I often feel like that just when I look at my life, I'm like, it's so normal. And I'm so grateful for that. And that's just a really beautiful thing to be able to have just normal day-to-day stresses or not have this huge, big burden or big secret to carry around with me. Being normal is pretty cool.
It's interesting that you say being normal is cool, and I think it comes back to the importance of having those positive influences such as those teachers on your life as well. Were they aware?
No one knew. So when I wrote my first book, I actually really hadn't shared with that many people. And to the point that I was like, to some of my very close friends, I am actually publishing a book. And they were like, about what? And I was like, Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And I used to write, I sometimes still blog, and it was like really kind of funny. Okay, maybe they weren't that funny. I'm just being generous to myself, but like amusing little pieces about mothering or life or things that I'd noticed. And so they were like, oh, book about that stuff. And I was like, actually, no. I'm going to say it's a bit of a trauma dump book. And they were like, why? What for? Like, what is the story? And one of my very best friends was like, what on earth do you have to write a book about? And I was just like laughing. And when I told them, they were like, holy crap, but you're so normal. Like, what? I was like, yeah, thanks. I don't know. Like, I didn't know when a good time to bring up about my dad being a murderer was. So anyway, you can read my book. And yeah, there was kind of like some awkward times like that. But no, it was definitely a shock, and no one at school knew about it. And I did hear from a couple of teachers after releasing the book, and they were like, wow, like we had no idea you were going through so much. And yeah, that was definitely a shock. Like I probably had a handful of people who I told, and that was it before the book came out.
Do you wish now that you had told more people and defied your mum about it, or were you happy? Or was it part of you like, yeah, I really kept it to myself, you know, like what was the emotion when you got that feedback saying we didn't have any idea? Was it, oh, I've masked really well all the trauma?
Yeah, and I think look, I guess that's one of the advantages to having like being a social worker and stuff now. It's like anyone could say anything to me in any therapy session, and I will just have that like, cool, like I won't have this super shocked reaction because I've had that like game face on since I was 6.
Yeah.
But what I guess I've learned is like everybody ends up having their own crap sometimes. And so, you know, people now experiencing like a really messy divorce or a really icky custody thing, or like extreme stress for other things happening. Like, and I feel like I just got my lot a bit earlier in life. And so, yeah, it kind of all comes out a little bit in the wash a bit later, and you have to use those tools of resilience and things. And I feel like I just had to develop them earlier than most people. But yeah, and I guess in writing the books and sort of opening up about those kind of secrets and burdens and all of those kind of experiences then allows other people to feel safe to do that with you as well. And I guess after writing the book, I received so many messages and so many people sharing their story with me about, you know, real challenges and hardships that they'd faced. And you realize like you're absolutely not alone. There's a lot of people going through a lot of things. And yeah, but we often feel like we have to sit with it alone. And that's so like hard to do and makes it so heavy and so shameful. But actually being able to share it just feels like, oh, it's actually not just me, and I'm okay the way that I am. And you're not the sum of your parts. If something bad happens to you, it can just be one thing, and then it doesn't have to define you. Do you know what I mean? Like, and
yeah, it's the whole reason why I started the podcast.
Yeah.
Is that people can listen to other people's stories and get inspiration or motivation or whatever it might be if they're having a moment that they can sort of push through as well. So
just to feel seen,
learn from other people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if one person feels, you're like, whoa, I had that experience. Or, you know, when I was writing the second book, I was talking about complex mother relationships and how do you navigate being a mum when you've never seen it up close before, like a good mum. And so many women were like, yes, yes. And so that's what inspired me to write that next book, was because I felt like that was just me, you know, having this super difficult relationship and challenging relationship with my mom. Like, everyone else around me seemed to be like, my mom's the best, I love her, she's who I want to be. And I wasn't feeling that. And so when I started to kind of investigate it further, and I could hear other people resonating with some of those challenges and that shame around not being like, not talking to my mother and not having a relationship with her, starting to hear other people resonating with that, I was like, yes, this is a thing, but no one's talking about it because it's so sad and shameful. So I'm onto it. I'm going to write a book. And yeah.
What's your relationship like with your mum now? Have you tried to reach out to her?
My mum has actually passed away now. And
okay.
She passed away still feeling all of that weight from all of those traumas, and still feeling like no one would love her if they knew the truth about her. And I guess that still makes me feel just so incredibly sad, because I feel like she had so much light in her, and that secret that she kept and that burden of my father's crimes weighted her down her entire life, and she never got to feel free of that. And I think that's something that actually really guides the way that my sisters and I live our lives now, is that we're not doing that. And we, flaws and all, are gonna be who we are and like make the most of it, and live our lives in a way that we feel that our mum didn't get to do.
And is that the main message that you would pass on to everybody as well? Like, that the person that's listening to this now, would you pass that message on to them as in the main lesson that you've learnt, or is there something else that you would wish to impart?
I guess the thing that for me has been the biggest learning of this life is that, it has to come from you. If you really feel like, I want to be this authentic person, I want to be who I am, and ultimately for me, I want to be loved for who I am. I didn't want to die feeling like I had all of these secrets and nobody really knew who I was. And for me, that was super important. And so I guess, building those little relationships of trust and coming to really let people in and know who you are has been probably the most valuable thing that I've ever done, the biggest risk that I've taken, but it's really paid off, because I just feel like I have these genuine relationships and I just get to be me. And I also can step aside from that trauma cycle and be like, I'm not carrying any of that stuff forward into the next generation. Like, it stops there.
Your books, House of Lies and Unraveling Us, where can people go and get them?
I guess these days everybody just jumps online. So pretty much Google The House of Lies or Unraveling Us and it will come up at Amazon or Booktopia or any of those great places that sell books. And if it's in a real life bookstore, which are my favorite places to go, then they'll order it in if it's not on their shelves still. So, yeah.
That's it. Thank you, Renee.
Thanks for having me.
The One Moment Please podcast.
Yeah.